So if you have felt like you're an outsider, or you have been a scapegoat in your family or in your peer group, I'm going to share a very simple model which kind of explains why people feel like an outsider, why people experience being a scapegoat. And it can give you insights into how to navigate that and be your true, brilliant self. So why is it important to understand this dynamic where certain people get to feel like they're the outsider and experience scapegoating? So it's important to understand this issue because, number one, being an outsider can result in people feeling that they are at fault. And, particularly when they're young, believing the negative things that they've been told. That can understandably cause stress. Not feeling accepted, not feeling safe can cause dis-ease in the body, and that can result in disease. We know from the ACE studies, adverse childhood experiences, that childhood abuse, including emotional abuse and household dysfunction during childhood, can make it more likely that we get health challenges in later life, and it can have a profound long-term effect on health. And trying to fit in, kind of hiding your true self, can be a bit like trying to put a round peg in a square hole, or trying to fit into a pair of shoes that are too small. Doesn't feel good, and it can cause stress in the body, as I said, and that can actually deplete your energy and vitality. And it doesn't work, and it requires hiding your true self. That doesn't feel good. So what is it that we need to understand? Well, let's look at the model that I'm talking about. It's important to bear in mind that this is a model, and models have limitations. Okay, there are other models, for example, the 7 levels of consciousness model by Richard Barrett, but just for simplification, I'm going to use this simple model. So the first piece of this model is the bottom rung, which is called box consciousness. So people with box consciousness follow rules, and there's a kind of tribal mentality, there's a hierarchy, people know their place, there's a pecking order. You may know the origins of the phrase pecking order, but it is literally hens would peck other hens to establish their dominance, and if hen A is the dominant hen, they'll peck hen B, and hen B, it's quite difficult to say. Hen B will know its place, that it's below hen A, and will peck hen C, and hen C will know its place and will peck hen D. If hen D thinks actually I'm bigger than you, then hen D will assert dominance over hen C, and they find their order. But for instance, if you think about the armed forces, the police, there's a hierarchy. People know their place, they follow the rules. Even at school, there were the cool kids, and then there's the school bully, and you kind of know where you are in that whole hierarchy. People have a sense of wanting to belong, and there's a fear of being left out. And in evolutionary terms, being part of the tribe was essential for survival, because if you got ostracized from your tribe, that made survival much more difficult. So people who develop this kind of fear of being left out, and therefore often, like as kids, we don't want to stick out too much. We don't want to look too different. We wear the uniform. We don't want to rock the boat. And it can be dangerous if you're a bit different. So I remember at my school, there was a kid who had ginger hair, and he got picked on. And a lot of people joined in so that they were part of the in crowd, and probably had some relief that it was not them who was being picked on. So they joined in. But there were other people who kind of recognized that this wasn't very nice behavior and didn't join in. Feel free to let me know in the chat. Are you the kind of person who joined in or kind of felt, oh, actually this is not very nice, and you didn't join in. I remember being on a sailing holiday years ago, and there was a chap, he looked a little bit like Mr. Bean, and he did get picked on by people. Even the staff of this company, it's called, actually I won't say the name of the company, but the staff were actually picking on this guy. I didn't think it was very nice. So having that kind of box mentality where there's order and structure and rules can be limiting. Okay, examples, police officers who close ranks, and for instance in America, in New York City, I think there was a film about a policeman called Serpico, showing my age here, I think it was in the 70s, and he got ostracized by his colleagues because he became a whistleblower. And there was a case in the UK a few years ago where there was a whistleblower in the NHS, and this person again got ostracized by management, got mistreated because he was speaking up about what was happening, and actually what he was speaking up about was really important. Okay, you may be familiar with the film Patch Adams, which the part of this doctor is played by Robin Williams, and he's kind of unconventional in his approach, and he was taken up before the medical board. I won't go and tell you the kind of story, but it's worth watching. But he got kind of picked up on because he wasn't conventional, and it's a very interesting film. But there can be positive aspects of having structure, order, rules. For example, if you're an architect, it's really important that you follow certain rules. If you decide to make a building and decide to use bricks made of jelly, that building is not going to stand up. But architects also can be creative and can kind of break rules of convention. Let me know if you know what that building is. It's a Disney building. Consider that, people can take the positive of the box kind of consciousness, but not be limited by it. So the next level is what we call heart consciousness. Now, just to be clear, this has nothing to do with intelligence. So for instance, some people can be box consciousness and kind of very limiting box consciousness, but they can still be super intelligent. I remember chatting to a doctor who was saying that certain conditions that people with ME/CFS present aren't real. So for example, a medical doctor trained in nutrition told me that I had candida, which is a yeast overgrowth. And another doctor said to my mum, that's nonsense. He's not got that condition. If he had that condition, he would be hospitalized and bedbound. And I thought that was a bit ridiculous because it was suggesting that there's only two settings: either you haven't got the condition or you're bedbound. And there was no concept that this could be something that develops and gets worse. Okay. And I also was diagnosed with having adrenal fatigue, and again another doctor said doesn't exist. This doctor trained in nutrition also diagnosed gut dysbiosis. That's leaky gut syndrome, where your gut wall is permeable. And actually, when I read up about it, it explained a lot of my symptoms, all of those things: the candida, the adrenal fatigue, and the leaky gut. And I went on a protocol for leaky gut, and it actually really helped. I was able to tolerate exercise. Still wasn't well, but it did help. So just going back to the heart consciousness, consider that there are some people who've got big hearts and they kind of feel for others and care for others. They feel for the underdog. They might be the people who don't feel comfortable about someone being picked on. Think of nurses. Think of some doctors who are kind of really driven to help others rather than just wanting to be a doctor for the power, the money, and the status. There are people who are very heart-centered, okay? And then the third piece of this model is what we call seeker consciousness. So these are people who seek depth of connection. They're interested in experiencing depth of meaning, depth of understanding of the human condition, their spiritual growth. These are people who have vision. So artists, musicians who have that creativity. I mentioned architects earlier. Again, they have a balance of kind of the box and structure consciousness, but they also have a massive capacity for creativity, and healers and therapists kind of fall into this category. These people tend to be a bit unconventional, rebellious. They're prepared to leave the tribe to find themselves, to express themselves more fully. These can be people who deeply connect to nature and have sensitivity. So they can be highly sensitive people in terms of picking up on kind of the dynamics, the interactions between people, and kind of feel sensitive to people's projection, and they can have strong sense of justice and injustice. So I'd like just to consider, if we think about that model, what's your sense of yourself? Do you feel like you fit easily into that kind of tribal mentality, wanting to be part of the tribe? It might be people who go and watch football. That's very tribal. You have one tribe pitting against another. Or do you feel like you're more heart-centered and have kind of seeker consciousness? It's important to understand that people can kind of either get stuck in one of those realms, or they can have a dominant trait. It might be box consciousness, and they're quite rigid in their thinking. They can be heart-centered, caring, but not necessarily so much of a seeker. But people who are heart-centered sometimes aren't very grounded. So, some people want to save the world, but they neglect themselves. Some people who are kind of the seeker consciousness also can be not very grounded. Some people have their head in the clouds. They're very idealistic, but they don't ground any of their ideas in reality or in practicality. But some people actually have evolved. They've taken the positive of all consciousness. So they've taken the positive aspects and they're able to integrate them in how they operate. And sometimes people, through a crisis, evolve through the level. So someone can be in box consciousness and have a crisis that triggers them to grow. I know someone who was very, very heart-centered, and when they had a crisis, it kind of triggered them to start looking at things in a deeper way. So how do we navigate this dynamic? If you consider that, if you look at that triangle, there's lots of people on that first rung, okay? And when you get up to the third rung, there's a smaller number of people. And that can be a lonelier place to be. Let's say you live in a rural environment and you'll kind of feel like you're different to the majority of people, then, how do you navigate that? So I'm going to share some ideas around that, and I invite you to close your eyes and just listen, only if it's safe to do so. If it's not safe, to close your eyes. But if it is, I invite you just to close your eyes. I'm just going to share some ideas. All right. So the first thing I want you to consider is that people's dysfunction is a function of their wounds and their fear. And so I invite you to consider that you are enough. Remember, if people don't understand that, then remember that their dysfunction is a function of their wounds and their fear. as I've just shared, it can be a lonely place being a seeker, and therefore you have to find your tribe. And in this day and age of the internet, we've got more opportunities to connect to other people who are like-minded in their thinking. Consider that if you are a highly sensitive person who does get triggered by other people, consider that it is possible to learn to manage those triggers and heal those wounds so that you are less triggered, and you can keep the positive aspects of being highly sensitive and let go of some of the aspects that make life challenging. I have made a video about that, so check that out on my channel. Next thing to consider is to think about the steps you can take to be more of your authentic self. It's important that we choose our fights. Consider, there are times when you might be exposed to people making statements that are unkind or whatever, and you have to decide when you're going to step in, when you speak up, when you feel like it's appropriate to do so, when it's not. I was on holiday recently, and these days I don't drink that much, and my friend and his friends are big drinkers, and so I knew that I was going to get some jokes or whatever, but I just thought that's fine, they have their little joke. And I actually got the nickname of Waterboy, which amused me because, to be honest, I've been called worse. And actually what was interesting is I went out with some of those people one day for lunch. I noticed for lunch a couple of people decided not to have a drink, and I hadn't seen them not drink before that. So maybe they were kind of felt, oh, maybe it's fine for me to not have a drink, or maybe they were going to do that anyway. I don't know. So consider that it's important to work on acceptance. I was working with a client who was very resistant to the fact that he had sensitivity, and that meant that he had to kind of look after himself, and he felt a bit frustrated about that. So we explored that, and I talked about the difference between a battered piano and a grand piano. Battered piano, you can just kind of knock it about a bit. You don't have to worry too much about the temperature of the room. But if you've got a Steinway that costs hundreds of thousands of pounds, then you're going to take better care of it. You're going to make sure the air temperature is optimal, etc. You can make sure it stays in good tune. We also talked about cars. Consider a Mini that you can, in the film The Italian Job, they drove it down stairways, and compare that to a Rolls Royce, which goes at a steady speed. You have to make sure it's well serviced, etc. So we explored the importance of accepting self. So learning to accept yourself as you are, and accepting others as they are, recognizing that they are doing the best they can with the resources they've got. And the next thing is to practice and cultivate forgiveness of yourself. Forgiving yourself and also forgiving others for transgressions. That can be challenging. I know for me there's been someone in my life who found it very difficult to forgive. I've had to really work on recognizing that their dysfunctional behaviours are just a consequence of their wounds, and they are doing their best. But it's not necessarily easy to do that. And finally, I encourage you to think about having compassion for yourself, and also cultivating compassion for others. So I hope that's given you some food for thought. If you've got any questions, leave a comment, and I'd love to know what's one takeaway from this conversation. So Mari says, very interesting, acceptance and forgiveness. Yeah, these are things that I think are really useful to cultivate. So if you've got any questions, do get in touch. But otherwise, keep going. Wishing you great health. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.